So, gaming has changed. Pretty much everyone shares the same sentiment at this point. It's within the public zeitgeist, and amongst gamer communities, everyone I speak to, online especially, you won't have to look too far to find out that gaming has changed. So I'm going to have a little look into that today, and kind of pick it apart to see how we got here. So the first point I want to talk about is that gaming has always changed. It's not necessarily been a bad thing. When you go back, you've got one hell of an evolution. It's totally different from music and film, where they are what they are. They're pretty much in that medium forever. They've just been digitized, right? And the distribution's changed of it. But gaming's highly dynamic, and it's that type of medium that will always evolve and change and adapt over the years. So you there's a great example of it just looking back briefly, right? You used to have arcades, and then arcades evolved into consoles with the Super Nintendo, and it was a big thing to have basically an arcade in your living room. It was the next step in the evolution, right? So consoles were a thing for many years. PCs started to drip in, but it wasn't. You had to go out your way to play PC games. So basically, the next step in that was handhelds. You had Game Boys and whatnot. And I used to love the Game Boy Pocket. Amazing! I took it everywhere with me. So it's still a media-based system at this point. You've got home consoles, handhelds. You buy your discs, you buy your cartridges, and how you enjoy that media is entirely up to you. You can do whatever you want with it. Well, you could do whatever you wanted to with it. Then fast forward, you've got the rising popularity of PC gaming, which still kind of stuck to that medium. You buy physical discs, you install it. It was quite tribal, like you can identify as a PC gamer or console gamer or whatever, but the delivery was still the same. The industry was still the same. You'd buy a physical copy to go into a platform, a system, and you'd enjoy it. Then we get into a more modern dynamic with delivery. Everything starts to become digitized, right? So you've got the evolution of the internet, and consoles try to adapt as much as they can over the years. You had like PlayStation 3 in it with the PlayStation Network, Xbox Live on Xbox. You had Steam. Steam was before all of that. But it was like a slow adaptation, right, to basically having a different means of delivery. But the consumption stayed the same for a while. People were still buying physical copies. So that slowly evolved over the years. I don't think that was actually a massive problem. So in the grand scheme of things, gaming changed a lot, right? You went from arcades to home consoles to PCs to digital distribution, mobile games, for example. You've got digitized gambling machines, and nothing really changed too much. Gamers adapted. They were very receptive to a new medium, so they could just basically, invest themselves into consuming in a different manner. But games themselves, the formula for the games and how they were basically produced stayed the same. So change is actually a really good thing. It has been a good thing, and it's been a fantastic thing historically. So there's just a certain change that is more recent, and it comes out of trends, and it comes out of all sorts of economic developments around the world. So I'll give an example of how I've changed my gaming consumption over the years. So growing up in the 90s, everything was obviously physical, right? There was a physical aspect to everything. It was a physical medium up to a certain degree. So I'd have like the PlayStation 1, for example. I had Sega Mega Drive. I even had, like, the first console I ever had was like an Amstrad GX 4000. It's like Alan Sugar's kind of Amstrad gaming system. The cartridges would always play up. But you know, growing up in that era, you were used to that kind of scenario with dodgy cartridges and scratched discs, and so it was one of them. You know, I had everything was physical up until about PS3, right, where they started to introduce like PlayStation Network full game downloads, but you didn't have to. A lot of people I knew just bought the game still, and I'll get to that. There's some funny stories with that. So, you know, I'd always save up and buy like the latest PlayStation 2 game, or when I was a bit younger, I'd like browse stores for like Game Boy games or whatever. And back then you didn't really know what to buy except for what the magazines would tell you or what your friends had. So anecdotally, you know, you'd gather all this information, you know, pre-internet age, pre-political and, you know, bias age and all that. You basically just, you took a chance on something random. You go, oh, I like the cover of this game, I'm going to buy this. And back then, even if you didn't like it, I personally was too stubborn to trade games back in. So if I bought a game, I'd stick with it. I'd be like, I bought this now, I've committed to it, and I'd play it through, and I'd at least complete the game before I then decided what to do with it. But it was a different way to consume games. You own that physical copy. You know, I could go to a friend's house and explore their game collection for a system I've never even heard of. I'd never even heard of the Sega Saturn until I went to a friend's house, and he had all these games, and the jewel cases were different, and it smelt different and looked different, and it was completely alien. But now we live in an age of everything's homogenized and everyone knows the same game, and you know, it's a massive elites. But back then it was like there was so many niche consoles and things to discover. No one had the same game. It was like finding treasure in a friend's house. You'd go over there and they'd be like, "You've never heard of this game? It's wild, it's amazing." Like, and then you'd go down a rabbit hole of playing this game with your friend for like weeks on end, and then your other friend would have some other game come out of Japan or something, and it was a whole vibe to it. There was that kind of music industry-esque pirate vibe where, you know, you'd go to your friend's house and you'd be discovering like bootleg stuff, whatever, but it was legit. You know, it had that vibe to it. Anyway, so the model was very consumerist, where you'd purchase a product or system, or they'd become bundled, and then, you know, it introduced those tribal aspects of like, oh, this is my system, this is the best system, it has these games, whatever. But the industry was very geared towards producing games for a system based on their hardware and their API for developers to build on. And that didn't change for a long time. That was like pretty solid for like a good 20 plus years. There's a really good ecosystem there of you know, of that industry. So I noticed a change when PlayStation 3 started to kind of introduce like full downloads, and I think this was like the first Assassin's Creed. My friend had the first Assassin's Creed for his birthday, I think it was, or Christmas, and he couldn't play it. He put the disc in, and the disc instantly popped up with a message saying, "Please update to version 1.1 to install or play the game wherever. And he hadn't had his PlayStation 3 connected to the internet yet. In fact, he didn't even want to. He was so upset that you had to hook the PlayStation 3 up to the internet to basically play this game. You know, his argument was, what if he didn't have internet? So he ended up taking the game back. He never played Assassin's Creed. So they lost out there. But it was a sign, a very early sign of things to come. Very early sign of things to come. And, you know, it was those little planted seeds that the industry kind of, okay, we got away with this, we got away with that. And so there's a snowball of change coming, where companies have a lot of power to do this. And then you could argue that they've been enabled to have this power. Piracy had been a big thing for the last 20 plus years, but I don't think it was a bad thing. I think a lot of people still bought physical copies, so it was a manufactured fear allowing developers to do such things like this. So my gaming consumption pretty much stayed the same. Like, yes, I was hooked up to online features, but I was personally attached to physical media. A lot of my friends really wanted to have just a digital only game because they didn't want to buy the game. They didn't want to go to the shop. They didn't want to buy the game. They didn't want to have the game in their cupboard or on the shelf somewhere. They just wanted a minimalist kind of setup. I was always against that. That's been something that's benefited me. But I've always liked the jewel case, always liked the art, the sleeve, the booklet. Who doesn't love a big, fat, chunky booklet to look through, flipping back in the car on the way home, like when you were a kid. Or even now as an adult, like I just fish out some old copies and I'm like looking through the art and the booklet, and it's just a magic to it, right? So I was always against that transition. I've always kind of tried to stay the same. I've never really been one to buy digital only copies. I think, apart from Steam, there's only one game I've ever bought that's a pure digital copy, but I already own the game beforehand. Now in the last few years, I've actually started to buy a lot more through Steam that I don't actually own. So like newer type games, I won't say new games, newer, like, late 2000s, maybe a bit further on than that, up to like 2015 maybe. So there's games I buy on Steam that are purely digital only, but that's my choice, and I think that's part of me accepting this is the way forward. But I trust Steam and their values, whatever. So that's my kind of journey into the consumption. So I still own all my physical media. Like every game I've ever bought since I was of a very young age, I still own, and I'm so happy about that. And I know a lot of friends have sold all their stuff, and they're tied into the latest gotchas, the latest services. So we'll get to that. So when did I notice an actual change, a meaningful change? For me, I was in a unique position because it was around the time that I went to university. Gaming kind of got put on the back shelf. And, I had bigger fish to fry. I was going through university, moving homes, changing countries. There was a lot of adulting involved. Games were actually still there during that time where, I could, on the weekends or one day a week, maybe just fully chill out and play some games. So they never really went away, but it allowed me to see things from a different perspective. It allowed me to just, at a glance, keep an eye on developments, right? So I think it was like first year of university, and the PlayStation 4 got released. I think I bought that with Fallout 4. which I enjoyed to a degree. I'm not going to get into a rant about Fallout and how crap it's become, but I enjoyed the upgrade in fidelity, the graphics, the engine was less crashy, whatever. So I enjoyed the system. I enjoyed the concept of the PlayStation 4. You could, share it online. You could stream. You had cloud saves and all this like cool stuff. But they started taking the step towards, the fully integrated PlayStation network where you have to pay PlayStation Plus and whatnot. And at the time, Netflix was huge. I had Netflix at the time. I don't have it anymore because it's changed, right? It's just, it's the catch and bait inchitification of technology. You introduce something so good to start with, and then they got you in a catch, right? And I think this is ultimately the concept of this whole thing, right? Subscription as a service. It's kind of ruined gaming to a degree because it's changed the recipe, the formula, the kind of ecosystem of how games are thought of, designed, produced, delivered and consumed. It's changed that completely. So you've got Spotify, right? Just name the big ones. You've got Spotify, you've got Netflix, you've got other stuff like Apple Music and everything now, but like everyone understands what a subscription as a service is. And this is fundamental really to understanding where we're at the minute. So you got the increase in mobile games, and I was hearing stories of like these mobile game apps having, and they call them whales, where people, like one in a million people or whatever, some statistic, spend like hundreds of thousands on a mobile game because they call them whales because they just dump in that much money in to get ahead. So pay to win games basically, just to get ahead of everyone else. So we had stuff like that developing. You've got digitalization of gambling machines. You just saw gambling machines everywhere now that are all digital, right? So they're all software based. And they receive updates, and they're controlled then by third parties, and so there's more control than ever because everything's update based. Everything's now becoming a subscription service. So then they realize actually we have more security in controlling our product and how it's consumed. It shouldn't be the fact. They shouldn't be controlling how it's consumed. They should just sell a product and allow the consumer to enjoy that product in whatever way they want. That is the major shift that's happened. So yeah, services are getting greedy, and this is just slowly snowballing, right, in the background. There's still physical media being sold. So all these things are just like a soup of of things that are happening in the industry, how consumer behaviours are affecting everything, and then what I think was kind of the next big step. I don't think it was a catalyst. I think it's just the next big step is COVID. The next big step in the catalyst of where this was going, because COVID hit and everyone was indoors, so everyone was now tuned in to a subscription service. They just go mad, right? They'd subscribe to like Prime, Spotify, Netflix. Google Stadia was playing about at the time, and seeing these figures, these companies seeing these figures, they're having a wet dream. This is like they're looking at these figures and they're going, wow, this is literally the future of these services, because physical delivery just basically went to 10% of what it was, right? Like physical production and delivery, like factory shut down, everything was digital right there. So everything got delivered digital. Subscriptions went through the roof. They could look at the numbers, they could look at the forecasts, and they could basically go, this is what we want, this is stability for us, because we can look at the spreadsheet and forecast what our earnings will be next year, or in this month, or this week. They could never do that with physical media. So this is a level of control and security and financial forecasting that has touched the industry. So they've kind of gone rabid, frothing at the mouth with this kind of stuff, and it changed everything. It changed absolutely everything, because companies now no longer run off of the backbone of passionate gaming nerds. It was now run off of corporate, fintech forecasting, and it's that is the biggest change in the industry. The culture has been completely hijacked. Old IPs that we used to love, created by gamers, for gamers, they've just been hijacked. Everything I could think of, all IPs and franchises have just been churned up by these big companies, forecasted, fit into a spreadsheet and churned out, and they'll think the gamers will eat it up. So this is where we're at. So why does this need to happen? And I stress that this does need to happen. This has to have happened. For all the years of change and dynamics in gaming, this was basically bound to happen at some point. So there needs to be a huge shift in public gamer sentiment when it comes to their game consumption. There needs to be an awareness before there's a pushback, so that companies change. Without that, they will keep milking every last drop. So there's a huge shift from what I've seen anecdotally. People I speak to of all ages, especially in my age group as well. My age group is probably the most passionate and furious of them all. And there's hardly anyone I know who even touches modern AAA, AA gaming. It's pretty much vintage scene. Amongst some remasters, also older games, and there's some indie games coming up with 1 to 5 developers who have made just a game that's just captivated everyone, right? It's just gone viral. People have sunk 800 plus hours into it. And they're charging $15 or £15 for these titles, whereas triple gaming now they've got to a point where essentially they're struggling as a medium, right? So it's like traditional media, right? Everyone's going underground for everything now. AAA is basically just become a corporate shell of what it thinks it should be, and that's through the entire process, the entire kind of life cycle of their games. They've injected social politics into it, ideology into it. They're running a corporate machine, hiring, not based on talent. They're just hiring for the, inclusion aspect. So there's nothing about that system that's ever going to make a good game. That's the corporate machine, right? So it's a corporate way of thinking to continue producing something. They just think, well, if we can't compete with subscription as a services, we have to try to bake microtransactions and services into the game, but also inflate the games with way more budgets, way more campaign advertising, and basically just charge more for the game out of inflation. So they're creating their own type of inflation for games, right? They're trying to make AAA games so expensive, and they're arguing that it has to happen, but they're facilitating that old thing. So it's an old model that's corporatized, that's really struggling. and you can see that anyway. You can see that in every aspect of it. So they're acquiring IPs to churn out, or they're tainting older IPs in the vein of, you know, this is the product you loved, we're remaking it, but it's just a quick last minute cash grab. So that will fade away. Just enable it to fade away by ignoring it. It's the best thing that anyone can do. Just ignore their nonsense, ignore their games, ignore their media, ignore their noise. It's just hijacked, right? The companies that we used to love as gamers, back in the day, were run by incredibly passionate people who were gamers at their heart, that wanted to push the boundaries of gaming. They had a lot of ideas to put into the game, and they were listened to. They were given free rein on creating some of these games. You know, they were just left alone to do their thing. And yes, you had bad companies back then giving them, you know, there was like deadlines, and you heard of all sorts of stories back then. But there was at least a dynamic between the people producing the game and then people taking that game and distributing it and making the money. But now it's like a whole corporate machine where the entire thing from top down is controlled and factored, and you know, it's a kind of refined scheme that they've got producing these games. So the best thing to do is just completely ignore it. It will die out. It will, as a medium, they will just die. So the best thing you can do as a gamer at this point is basically just enjoy what we have. We've got a huge backlog of consoles, of games, for all sorts of media that's spawned off of all these franchises and systems. There's no shame in going back and being a vintage gamer. So some people like emulation, some people like the hardware aspect. Personally, I do a bit of both. I like emulating games, but I also like playing on the old hardware. There's a charm to it, there's a nostalgia to it, there's a lot connected to that. So the best thing you can do is go back, as well as keeping an eye on the indie scene. And when I say indie scene, it's usually like, you know, you got this idea of like, oh, it's going to be jank, it's going to be like unpolished, whatever, but it's really not the case. Technology has advanced so much now to enable developers to basically just pick up a game engine, a graphics library, and this, that, the other, and literally just not worry about the technical stuff and just focus on actually making the game. Like, what makes this game good? What's the design? What's the direction? You know, how am I going to make it fun for the players? And that's a big factor that's lost in a lot of games. So a lot of these indie games now are basically touching on a lot of the feel-good stuff coming out post PlayStation 2 era, PlayStation 3 era. Like, there's a lot of good stuff packed into these indie games that, you know, they should not be overlooked. So it's a very interesting development. You've also got AI now, which everyone knows about, the AI slop and everything. And you'll see this mad rush. Companies will, like the AAA companies, will eventually kill themselves off through it, because they'll just inject so much AI into this corporate system that they have. They think, we can just get rid of developers, AI will power our game for us, and they'll be rolling in cash. And they've got like these images of like the cash raining down, and you know, the evil laugh. But they just leave them do their thing, and they'll kill themselves off, because AI is still, as much as it's a heated topic, right? But one factor is it's not going away. AI is here to stay. So we have to leave it mature, and we have to leave developers choose and kind of use it to their advantage, but not use it as a replacement. So what I mean by that is, like, you know, it's like seasoning when you're cooking, right? You add a little bit of seasoning here and there, and that's what I think AI should be to a lot of development. It should just aid you in producing something. It shouldn't just produce everything for you. and it to replace everything. Like, that's not how it works. So there needs to be a maturity in the approach to AI and how it's used, and that I think will definitely change gaming again. So the next step in future of gaming. So for now, I'm more than happy. Like, I'm playing old games. Like, I got such a backlog of games that I'll pretty much have until the day I die. There's so much content. There's so many games. There's so many kind of storylines and franchises to indulge in and even replay. Like, I can replay some of the Final Fantasy games, and I'm like, wow, I forgot about all these little bits and bobs. Like, people forget things. Revisit the old games and play them, and they are just incredible. So that's my thoughts on it all. Yes, gaming has changed, but we're going through a kind of really awkward transition period at the minute, where we just need to indulge in what we believe is the right thing, and ignore the noise.